Racist text messages from the CEO of a major fast food chain to a black woman mayor. The fallout from Tuesday's election and the announcement that Letitia James, New York's Attorney General, is running for governor are all topics for discussion this morning. We will discuss with one of Washington's best political reporters, Lauren Burke, and one of the NNPA's top publishers from the Dallas Weekly, Patrick Washington. It all begins right now on the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known live morning breaking news program. First, let's bring on the president and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis Jr. Dr. Chavis, good morning.
Good morning, Stacy Brown, and we welcome our special guests, and certainly on behalf of Karen Carter Richards, the chair of the National Newspaper Publishers Association. We represent 230 African-American owned newspapers and media companies all across America, including the Dallas Weekly. So pleased to have Brother Washington with us. We got headlines. We're to get right into it. God bless everybody this morning.
Yeah, and Dr. Chavis, we're going to do it a little different this morning. We're going to bring on our guests right now as we go through the headlines so they can weigh in as well. We're going to bring in Lauren Burke. She is a columnist as well for the NNPA, and she has her own thing there, Lauren Burke filed. And of course, Patrick Washington of the Dallas Weekly. Good morning to you both.
Good morning, Lauren, and we appreciate your work. You're right on top of everything. Nothing happens on Capitol Hill without Lauren Burke.
Exactly. And nothing happens in Texas without Patrick Washington being on top of it, he and his staff, and we are grateful to have you both. Let's just jump into the headlines first. Phil Murphy in New Jersey, he has won razor-thin margin. He won election. The results were called last night, unofficially, of course, but he seems to have won that election. Lauren, Patrick, you guys want to weigh in on how significant that race was, considering that people thought it would be a landslide. In fact, President Biden visited Jersey a couple of weeks ago, and when asked, he said he wasn't there to push for the election. He thought it was no contest.
Yeah, it shows you, too, that the polls are not particularly accurate. I think most of the polls have Murphy at eight points up. And there's almost a shocker. I actually am sort of enjoying it because the mainstream press wanted to run the typical Dems in disarray narrative, going off that race, and of course the race in Virginia. Now it turns out that Patrick Murphy has won re-election, not by much. It was sort of a sleeper. Good example of how, I think it's hard for people to be getting off of the COVID year of 2020, the year of, particularly with Black voters, getting them out and, running messages to people. This is the most important election of our lives every single year, which may be true, but I think it wears people down. And I think we saw a little of that in New Jersey.
Yeah, and we also saw a Democrat who people thought should easily win in Virginia. We saw Terry McAuliffe lose. We want you guys to weigh in on that as well.
Well, but can I just go back to Jersey 1 second?
Yes.
The reason why Murphy got reelected was because of the Black vote. Those are the last votes that came in.
Right.
And I think sometimes I agree with Lauren. We can't buy into the narrative sometimes of the mainstream media. And I think those inner city votes in Essex County and other counties in northern New Jersey made the difference. And so I think that as we go into 2022 with the midterm elections, the Black vote in all these states, the Latino vote in all these states are going to be very, very important. And once again, the Democratic Party cannot do what it needs to do without Black American voters.
Yeah. And Lauren, what happened in Virginia? Can you just quickly break that down for us?
What happened was Terry McAuliffe did not have a strategy for Black voters, was not talking directly to Black voters. They thought that the strategy was effectively to throw Barack Obama on stage and Vice President Harris, and that was going to somehow, that shiny object strategy of let's have Pharrell Williams. That doesn't work because there was no specific policy discussion. Former Governor L. Douglas Wilder had to really inject himself on HBCUs. And, people get mad at that in Virginia in terms of, oh, how dare he inject himself? Well, if he doesn't inject himself on an issue on the Black agenda list, nobody's doing it in Virginia. It's not like, I grew up in New York, but my mother's from Virginia. It's not like New York where you have a very constant, consistent African-American presence in politics, which are bringing up Black agenda items. Virginia's a little bit quiet. They tend to let some of these white politicians run the narrative. and not talk about Black issues a lot. Doug Wilder came in there and said, look, we're going to talk about HBCUs. And then Glenn Youngkin ends up tweeting that back in June that I'm going to fund HBCUs fully, is 5 in Virginia, and then makes a statement at a business event in Richmond 2 weeks ago. I'm going to fully fund HBCUs. I'm going to have them in the budget. And stuff like that shouldn't happen if you're the Democratic candidate. Like, you're a Democratic candidate, you need 20% of the Black vote. You can't be asleep on things like that. HBCUs is an easy one because both Democrats and Republicans agree that they're important. You're not going to get a lot of pushback from Republicans against funding on HBCUs. A lot of these HBCUs are in Republican districts, so, or in red states. So, I mean, this idea, that was one of the things that happened. The other thing that happened was that Terry McAuliffe is not an exciting, engaging candidate for our times. We live in a time of exciting, engaging, very progressive candidates, you know, your Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes and your Cori Bushes and your, you know, Jamal Bowmans. They're speaking truth to power in a way that the McAuliffe era, the Clinton era, was not back in the 90s. And so he was dated, it didn't work, and he lost.
And he also, Lauren, he also made a comment that seemed to really resonate with people. I saw a lot of folks talking about this yesterday. He made the comment that parents should not dictate in any way, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but in any way what their children are taught in school. And that comment seemed to have really hurt him.
It did. It was the comment of the election. It was the pivotal moment of the election. It was an example of a lack of message discipline. When you have a candidate that's 64 years old, and there's nothing wrong with being 64 years old, this is not, I don't think we should get into cliches about, oh, it's a white male, boring candidate. There's plenty of white males in our politics that are very exciting. Bernie Sanders comes to mind. Beto O'Rourke comes to mind. This particular person, Terry McAuliffe, lost this race because he was acting like it was the 1990s and not 2021, where we have Twitter, we have endless video, we have endless content coming in. They took that comment and they just ran it again and again. The Republicans have better comm strategy. They were running a presidential style campaign on the Glenn Youngkin side. I went to several of his events, 6 or 7, and I was like watching the Obama 2008 campaign in terms of quality, in terms of engagement, in terms of the way I was treated. They wanted to know who I was, who you writing for. Hey, we want to talk to you. The attitude is completely different. On the Democratic side, it was like they're running a celebrity that they had to protect. And I was at McAuliffe's party the other night on election night, and me and a candidate who had run for lieutenant governor, a businessman, very successful businessman in Virginia. I was with him, and you know, he's actually pretty wealthy. He was trying to get into the VIP room, and they stopped us and hustled us out. And it was like the attitude of this campaign is just totally different. Yeah. And you can't have that and expect to win.
Also, yesterday, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, again, the Republicans shot it down once again. Dr. Chavez, Patrick Washington. Patrick, I know out in Texas, we have those voter suppression repressive laws. This is another huge blow to Democrats, isn't it?
I think absolutely. I mean, I think Lauren put it perfectly. It's like they're playing a game that hasn't been played since the 90s, and I think everyone is recognizing the failure in the messaging, the failure in the attitude, the failure in even the way in which certain sectors of the population are being engaged or not being engaged. And I think this is yet another example of how the Democrats are bringing knives to gunfights. As Lauren said earlier, it just doesn't make any sense. And especially down here where voter suppression is like a standard here. There's been people fighting that issue, an uphill battle for decades, as long as I've been alive and longer. And it just seems like the fight isn't understood on the left. And that's very disconcerting because we got a lot going on down here, from everything from, we'll get into it, but the abortion law, the border, the voting suppression, just the general suppression of ideas from people of color, Black people, Native Americans in Texas is standard. And our governor seems to be putting on high, just top priority as white supremacy is the law of the land. And we're going to reiterate that over and over and over and over again because the demographics are changing always. I think that, and I might be wrong on this, but I believe that Texas had the largest African-American population growth because of moving and everything else. And they're not moving into certain areas that are traditionally black, if you will. So they're messing up the status quo. And I think everyone can see the end of the tunnel eventually changing. But while it can be controlled, they're going to do everything in their power. And we have literal criminals in our public offices. Like, I don't know what everybody else will say. They're criminal. Like, it's like, no, like cats under investigation by the FBI right now are setting laws in Texas. And so everyone is concerned. Everyone's angry. Everyone's on edge. And the only people seeming to be celebrating them podunk folk out there with the red hats on, saying that this is the way the world's supposed to work. So it's nerve wracking out here a little bit.
Well, we're going to get more into the Supreme Court and those things in a moment. Let's segue just a bit out of politics into a serious story out of Chicago. A protest was held yesterday at McDonald's, at the headquarters of McDonald's, after text messages were revealed about racist and tone-deaf remarks that McDonald's CEO Chris Kempczynski sent to Mayor Lori Lightfoot. The texts were just revealed. They were sent in April, but they were just revealed yesterday. And he had actually blamed the deaths of 13-year-old Adam Toledo and 7-year-old Jaslyn Adams on their parents. He said, with both, the parents failed those kids, which I know is something you can't say, he said, even harder to fix. He wrote these in a text to the mayor. Remember, Jaslyn was killed in a shooting at the drive-thru at a McDonald's. So just a few weeks prior, Adam was shot and killed by a Chicago officer during a foot chase in Little Village. A spokesperson for the mayor criticized the CEO's comments in a statement yesterday. She said, victim blaming has no place in the conversation, because Kempczynski has now apologized, saying his words were wrong and lacked the empathy and compassion I feel for these families. Well, you should know, when you think of social media today, we tend to chastise children for saying things that's hard to take back. Well, the McDonald's CEO even wrote in his initial text that I know it's something you can't say. Well, here we are now, fast food king. You should not have said that. Y'all want to weigh in on that, Patrick, Lauren, Dr. Chavis?
I think it's pretty symptomatic of corporate America's attitude. I mean, we had a nice summer of everybody loves black people, and then we still find that the leaders of these corporations are still just as discriminatory and racist in certain aspects as they were before. So sadly, it's not shocking. And I think it's pretty entertaining how a lot of people don't realize how digital media works and how putting things on paper or in text can be a problem for you if you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Dr. Chavis?
Yes, I agree. And again, I want to thank Patrick Washington and Lauren Burke for their insight and for their courage to speak and write truth to power. That's the importance of the Black press. What the McDonald's CEO reveals, I agree with Patrick, is that when we talk about challenging systemic racism, it's not about one personality. It's not about one political party. It's not about one election. This is deep seated in the American fabric. And we're making progress, but we still have a long ways to go. And I think that we should not let up the momentum and the attitude about voting in Black America has to be always our top priority. We can't let our guard down, even sometimes when we win elections. Even though I talked about the Black vote helping Mayor Murphy to get reelected in New Jersey, and the absence of the Black vote made sure that Terry McCullough was going to lose in Virginia. The McCullough campaign didn't spend any money, hardly, with the Black press in Virginia. And we have a strong Black newspapers in Virginia, but they took the Black vote for granted. And now Democrats are going to suffer in Virginia because of taking the Black vote for granted. In terms of the McDonald's guy and all the things that are going on now, the trial just started in Wisconsin of the man who murdered people during the demonstration.
Kyle Rittenhouse.
Right, Rittenhouse. All these things are connected. I don't want us to see these as isolated incidents or isolated comments. It is about the deep-seated systemic racism in America and the browning of America, where Blacks and Latinos are increased the population, increase our potential to transform America into a non-racial society. Right now, America is still a racial society, a racist society. And like apartheid in South Africa, we have to work to make sure that the future of American democracy is not racist.
Yeah, Lauren, Patrick, Dr. Chavis, we segue to New York. Letitia James is running for governor. Now, you know, she is instrumental in a couple of major cases. She's brought charges against former Governor Andrew Cuomo. She's obviously spearheaded charges, or at least an investigation, I should say, not yet charges, into former President Donald Trump. First of all, I want to ask, I'll throw this to Lauren. What's the optics on Letitia James's run for governor?
Well, the timing, the optics were interesting. It was always been rumored that Tish James was going to run for governor, so that was not in itself some big surprising piece of news. A lot of people have seen her as somebody who potentially run for governor. What has changed the optics, of course, is that this year the governor, since I think it was 2011, Andrew Cuomo, resigned after the Attorney General, Tish James, investigated him in a sort of, I don't want to say a non-judicious way. Obviously, her office has the right to investigate, but there were no formal criminal charges at the time of her investigation that would yield things like discovery and very specific investigation on both sides of those arguments with regard to sexual harassment on the governor of New York. So I think that what is likely to happen with Tish James moving forward is going to be a lot of questions about conflict of interest, as we still struggle with the question of Me Too and the question of due process and the question of innocent until proven guilty and investigation around these issues. Because it was, in fact, Tish James that got up and effectively, which is usually a no-no for most prosecutors and certainly attorney generals, she got up and really voiced an opinion about the case in a way that I think caught a lot of people off guard who watch people who are in judicial circles. So, for example, when she announced her investigation on Andrew Cuomo, she said, you know, I believe these women and I believe women, and made this very affirmative comment. I can't imagine that these things will not come up in conversation during her run for governor. I think she has a great chance. She's clearly experienced. And I think, frankly, probably has more political talent than Kathy Hochul, the current governor who rose from lieutenant governor to governor. But I can't imagine that these conversations will not come up, because I suspect that Andrew Cuomo still has enough support out there to run a narrative about the way that Tish James ran that investigation.
Yeah, I want to, before we segue into the Supreme Court and what's going on there, we're getting a lot of comments this morning, and I want to just lift up two in particular. The NNPA's executive administrator, Claudette Perry, says, I do not think we're making progress at all. The reddening of the nation and the local elections around the nation proves that. One step forward, one step back. And Bobby Henry of the West Side Gazette says systemic racism has a rippling effect that touches everything in society. It's like when you throw a rock in a lake and the ripples go out, it touches everything. And so, and Zanetta Gallo is asking, can you address the Texas Compassionate Act not being enforced? So let's jump into this. The abortion law, after the court let Texas effectively outlaw most abortions in a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court justices did hear arguments that could allow it to reverse course. The case puts Justice Brett Kavanaugh in the spotlight as the most likely member to switch sides. Patrick, Lauren, you want to weigh in here?
Well, I defer to Lauren for more of the Supreme Court analysis, but abortion and abortion rights, women's rights have been a big issue in Texas and probably obviously the nation. But here it seems to be almost like a holy war for some of these guys. And it felt as though the Supreme Court was on the side of the state, which the state is being real manipulative in its wording to make sure that you can basically put bounties on people's head if they, do these things. And it's just strange that would even not be considered something to be looked at because of just the nature of how that gives the state all this power. It's been talked about in count. I don't know what's going to happen. Obviously, there's not been a lot of progress in the Abortion Rights Act in Texas ever. There's been every now and then there's a spike, but it kind of stays stationary at keep the women suppressed. And for some strange reason, they tend to have support in the state, specifically in the central part and, where the big cities are not. But I don't know. And I don't have an idea of how this is going to turn out, because it just doesn't seem as though the Supreme Court was taking it seriously. I understand that there was a great argument put forward not too long ago, challenging it, that Brett Kavanaugh has, will have to respond to. But I think Amy Coney Barrett had some points within that argument that were kind of knocked down. But from a strictly Texas standpoint, the Supreme Court is looked at as, are you going to codify this evil here? And everyone's just wondering if that's going to happen. And I'm telling you, when I say people are confused and nervous, that's really the only sentiment I've seen out in the streets, which is people are nervous, people are confused, and they don't quite know what to do, because it just doesn't seem real. Like, it doesn't seem like that could have happened.
Yeah, and Patrick, real quick, Zanetta Gallo says says, I am disabled and use a Texas Compassionate Act for medical reasons. Can you just really briefly touch on that, and perhaps we can get into that in a later broadcast?
The CARE Act. I mean, everything about CARE is under scrutiny in Texas. It does seem as though someone, and I can't tell you who it is, has pinpointed people in need and used that as the attacking point. And not being enforced, like, there are so many different laws and stuff that just aren't enforced, that are supposedly for the people here. And I don't have a list, because I'm not, a political pundit or anything, but she's absolutely right in that it's disheartening and it's sad, because I live in Dallas, a major city, blue county, if you will. And these things kind of seem like we're in a bubble sometimes, because the rest of the state kind of reacts that way. Dallas, and I do look at this as a fault of ours. We're in this imaginary world of the world should be like Dallas, when Texas is Texas, and it's huge. And that overwhelming sentiment of the other, the disenfranchised, the non-white, etc., are all the enemy here. And so even though on the surface there may be some like language or some conversation that seems like it's, oh yeah, we're like the rest of the nation, that blackout last year is the state. It is on its own thing, and it will fail itself and act like the rest of the world is wrong. And so I don't really have an answer for that. Like I said, I'm more into the right here in South Dallas kind of thing, because we got a bunch of stuff going on with gentrification and redistricting and people swiping people's property up under them. So I kind of stay in that lane. But those things seep into our community, because we don't have proper clinics around here. We don't have the proper healthcare systems. We don't have we're in a food desert. We don't even have grocery stores. And I've been told by police, city council, everybody around us, oh, it's really because no one wants to, bring a grocery store, and they can't make money. But I'm like, but everybody here goes 5 miles to get, so somewhere else is getting our money. You're telling us we can't afford it. And it's like, it's just blatant lies now. People will just put it on the plate. It's just like, y'all are just lying. And now you're just like, stop asking me about things so I don't have to lie to you. And that's really what the attitude of the state is. Stop asking questions and we won't lie to you.
And Lauren, I want to unpack this abortion debate, this abortion law. There's some things that are bubbling under the surface. That's the abortion part is just the headline, isn't it?
Well, it's not just the headline. The Texas law is effectively trying to undo 1973 Roe v. Wade. They wanted to throw a case up to the Supreme Court. It made it to the Supreme Court. And the question is, will these conservative justices do something which I think would be fairly unprecedented, which is to give standing to people to sue for things that are none of their business? That's really what this comes down to. And I think that's unlikely. And the arguments that were heard would indicate that more conservative justices are not on board with that. And I'd be really surprised if they were, because you're really changing a standard in law with regard to standing that would change a lot of legal proceedings moving forward. So I actually think that the conservative court is going to surprise everybody and rule that the Texas law is unconstitutional. If I had to predict it, just based on what we heard, earlier this week, and really what they've argued before, I actually think if Antonin Scalia was alive, he probably would rule it that it was unconstitutional.
Well, and we also see the New York, the justices are considering the constitutionality of a longstanding New York law that imposes strict limits on carrying guns in public. And this is why I asked about it being a headline, because they're underneath all of that. if that were to stand, if that Texas law were to stand, so many other things, as was stated in the Supreme Court, would also be at jeopardy, including religious rights, including your Second Amendment rights. So it seems like there's so much more going on than what meets the eye. At least that's getting attention anyway. Dr. Chavis, you want to weigh in on there?
Well, yes, I agree with Lauren. I think that, again, the Supreme Court is representative of what's going on in lower courts, what's going on in municipal courts. The judicial system also needs to be reformed. We talk about police reform, but you can't have police reform without also judicial reform, criminal justice reform. All of these systems are interconnected. And I agree with what Patrick said and what Lauren said this morning. But, you know, I sit back and as I listen to their excellent analysis, I just want to point out that is the reason why we have the black press. It is our job not to be overwhelmed with a lot of negative stuff. I could have used another word. Our job is to motivate and inspire our people to vote like voting is life and death. And even if we lose an election, we go out and vote harder. We don't give up. This is not an opportunity or a time for us to join the cynicism of the mainstream press. And that's why I'm so thankful for Let It Be Known, because we have an opportunity not only to comment on what's going on, but put it in its proper perspective. Freedom is a constant struggle. If you don't want freedom, stop struggling.
Well, there it is from Dr. Chavis. Lauren, also, there's talk that recent polls are indicating that the court is suffering a drop in public support. Does that even matter?
Probably not to the members of the court, although some of them did get sensitive enough to actually publicly comment on that, namely Justice Alito. And I think it was Clarence Thomas that made a few comments with regard to the court being political or being seen as a political arm. I mean, I think inherently this is a political situation. You're chosen by a president for a reason of one party or another. Obviously, the Republicans choose conservative justices and the Democrats choose more progressive justices for the Supreme Court. So the idea that you can take politics completely out of it, I think is naive. But there's some more sort of concern about more overt political activity. I think particularly since Clarence Thomas's wife is very politically active and things like that. But really, until you see what their specific rulings are, the court actually has surprised us a few times, John Roberts surprised us in support of the American of Obamacare. I'll use the word Obamacare. I don't think it's a slur at all. I think you should be proud of the word Obamacare. But anyway, it was surprising the court upheld the Affordable Care Act. And you never know what's going to happen to the Supreme Court. Obviously, it is a right-leaning Supreme Court, thanks to, I think, some weakness on the Democratic side in Congress and some real hardball politics on the Republican side. They effectively stole 2 court picks from the Democratic Party. But sometimes they can surprise us and have some rulings that aren't that conservative, not what the Federalist Society wants. And you have to just sort of go case by case.
Yeah, Lauren Burke, we certainly appreciate your insight and commentary. We are certainly privileged to have you. And of course, Patrick Washington, the Dallas Weekly, y'all continue to do such great work out there and under trying circumstances too. Dr. Chavis, your close.
Well, again, I'm optimistic. I can't get up every morning feeling depressed and feeling like hopeless and feeling like, Malcolm X said it right. I mean, about racial justice, the whole country, and anything south of the Canadian border is the South. So the fact that some states are red, some states are blue, that's interesting. But the question is, what are we going to do to empower ourselves at the local community level, the statewide level, and regional levels? We got a brother now who is the mayor of the largest city in the United States, the media center of the United States, the financial center of the United States. Eric Adams is now the second Black mayor of New York City. There's going to be a lot of interesting implications of that. And now you're talking about a Black woman running for governor of New York at the same time. And remember what happened when Stacey Abrams ran for governor of Georgia? She came very close, but people came out of the woodwork to try to prevent a black woman from being governor in Georgia. So all these things are connected, but I'm optimistic because if you look at the pendulum of history, it is swinging in our direction, and we should never lose sight of that.
Yeah, and we end this morning with not one, but two black facts about the same person. Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall said that he was punished for misbehavior in school by being forced to recite the Constitution. Ultimately, he memorized it. Justice Marshall also was once a classmate of jazz vocalist Cab Calloway, Harlem Renaissance writer Langston Hughes, and future Ghana President Kwame Nkrumah during their studies at Lincoln University. That's a black fact from the Black Press of America. Everybody stay safe, stay well, and thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.